All right, welcome to the SnydeReport. I am your host, Gary Snyder. Before we get to our next guest, I need to remind you of our sponsors. The first one is Robin Winston, does a great job of sponsoring both the newsletter and the podcast. Just a reminder that you can sign up for the newsletter. It does go out to about 100,000 Hoosiers every day. And also former Congresswoman Jill Long Thompson. Her book is out now, Across the Aisle, Why Bipartisanship Works for America. You can get that anywhere you buy your books. Joining me now is Michael Hicks. Mike, welcome to the SnydeReport.
I'm so happy to be with you, Gary.
Hey, it is Liberation Day.
That's right, it is.
No, just I'm going to let you take a minute here and just let people know who you are, what you do, and what your purpose is.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm the director of the Center for Business and Economic Research at Ball State. This is a now almost 55-year-old research center. We're part of a national consortium of research centers that the American Economic Association set up to do work in communities and in states to share data. My research and that of my colleagues is in public finance, which is tax policy and spending, regional economics, the reason why and where businesses and households locate, and then the effect of different public policies on economic activity. So I do forecasting and the like. I've been here now, be 18 years this summer, worked at two other research centers, and I'm just really uh, blessed to be here in Indiana at this research center with three, super colleagues: Dagny Falk, the director of research; Emily Warnell, who runs the Rural Policy Research Institute; and Seth Payton, a pretty seasoned public policy researcher who's with us as well.
So my time at Ball State and yours sound completely different.
I've been to the Chug two occasions, so I'm not sure there's been no overlap there.
Oh, yeah, I played some football there and uh, drank way too much. We'll just leave it at that.
The beauty of college.
Isn't it though? Well, the reason I ask you on today, there are several reasons. Property taxes, brand new Yukons and GM $90,000 trucks. But the first thing I want to discuss with you, because my background, while in finance, is more on the financial services side. I'm not very seasoned, if you will, on, economic outlooks, things like that. So today is Liberation Day, as according to the president. And why don't you kind of explain to us what he means by Liberation Day, and we can go from there.
You're asking an awful lot for me to try to deduce what the president really means by this. So, as we speak, or in the coming hour and a half, we're going to face uh, import taxes or tariffs placed on on goods that Americans consume, potentially from all over the world. We have today the lowest, up until 2018, we had the lowest tariff regime in U.S. history, very small import duties, which has been generally the post-World War II trend by all of the developed countries and most of the lesser developed countries that are trying to get in that club of affluence, so that we're accommodating free trade. Been an important part of conservative political ideology really since Adam Smith in 1775. You'll note in our Constitution, we actually prevent interstate restrictions on trade. The Interstate Commerce Clause requires states to freely allow areas to move, goods and services to move across borders, making the U.S. the first big free trade zone in history. And so the affluence that we experienced in the early 19th and 20th and now 21st century have been largely an offshoot of that. The benefits of trade are that it makes us more productive. It lets us do things that we're really good at. It allows innovation to flow where it should flow. It's overall a good thing. And the Trump administration reopened the idea of tariffs that had been really closed since the Great Depression. The debacle of the Hoover era tariffs helped the estimates are between 50 and 60 7%, about half to two-thirds of the pain of the Great Depression were caused by a tariff regime that looks very much like the one we're imposing right now, that was designed to move economic activity back to the United States, which had the opposite effect, which was deepen and lengthen the Great Depression, taking the unemployment rate from 6-7% to 24.5% by 1933. And so President Trump is again trying to call back the economic ghosts of the Great Depression. And he's going to do so in an announcement today that will put, if I understand this right, we currently have a 20% tariff on Chinese goods. We have a 20% tariff on steel and aluminum from the European Union. He is now going to place 20% tariffs on all other products from all other countries except Canada and Mexico, where he's going to impose a 25% tariff on those goods, and then a 25% tariff on all exported cars. So that's between a 20 and a 25% increase, and about 1.6 on the cost, about 1.6 trillion dollars worth of imported goods into the United States each year, which makes this today the largest tax increase on American consumers in U.S. history by any measure. So this is a stunning effort, I think, in his view, to do potentially two things. One is to disrupt global relationships, trade relationships. The second one is to move more economic activity back to the United States, which is funny because our economy peaked in last quarter. So we're not moving anything back. We're now both the richest we've ever been, produced the most manufacturing goods we've ever produced, and the largest GDP. So by any measure, adjusted for inflation. And so the very bizarre, and I think should be very widely unwelcomed turn of events today.
So let me ask you this, because there seems to be a little confusion by some about who pays tariffs. Is it the federal government? Is it the country that is shipping the goods in, or is it the Hoosier consumer?
Right, great question. There are two different ways to think about this. There's the administrative collection, and the administrative collection of a tariff is usually borne by the company that's bringing it to the port or the company that is buying it. So a business at the border is paying that tax administratively. The problem is that that's not what economists call the incidence of taxation. So we know that businesses then will have to raise prices. So consumers are going to swallow some of that. Businesses are going to swallow some of that. The best way to think about this is that whoever has the least price responsive demand curve for that product, demand or supply curve, is going to bear the burden. And because we're a rich country, we are less price sensitive than the poor countries that are primarily importing into our country. Although that's not exclusively true. We buy stuff from Canada and France and Switzerland. So chocolates, wine, and automobiles in reverse order. So they'll split that. So the best you can do is pay about half of it if you're an American. So we're probably paying half those Canadian ones. We're probably paying almost 100% of the Chinese, the Malaysian, the Mexican imports. So it's a direct tax on American households. And the estimates that I've seen from the sort of center right tax foundation are as high as $2,500 per household per year. And that's before the 20% reciprocal tariff, which could bump it up to $4,000 per family per year.
So why are they calling it Liberation Day? I mean, who is it liberating for?
Again, I struggle with this because economists put this into the bucket of things we understand really well. There's almost nothing in the 250 years since Adam Smith penned his Wealth of Nations that we've seen more people dabble in than tariffs. And so we have all these beautifully exercised natural experiments where one country will impose a tariff, another country will retaliate or not, and we can see the economic activity that has come over this. So if I were a young economist trying to write a doctoral dissertation, I couldn't write something in tariffs. My advisor would say, look, we already know all of the answers to that. So what I think here is that Donald Trump believes quite fallaciously that if we make it very costly to import, that Americans will decide to manufacture more things in the United States. The things that we bought from overseas will manufacture here. That will create new jobs and new prosperity in the United States. And that sounds really fine until it bumps up against the historical record and the facts on the ground. The unemployment rate today is 4%. The United States is manufacturing like crazy. It's near peak manufacturing production record. We're just doing so with fewer people. So if we're going to do more manufacturing, we're going to have to manufacture more people, which we don't have. We're cutting imports of people through immigration. So we don't have any place for manufacturing employment to grow. And then we have to have consumers who are insensitive to these price changes. So the reason we're buying stuff from overseas is because it's cheaper. It's cheaper to grow avocados in Mexico than Michigan. It's cheaper to do some low value added parts in China than the US. If we bring it back to the US, we're going to create a lot of low value added jobs, a lot of $9, $8 an hour jobs. No Americans are going to take those to make wiring harness component plastic parts or assemble them by hand. And so the belief that I think the president has is this is some magical elixir of prosperity, even though the evidence says quite the contrary.
So why do we see unions like the United Auto Workers, United Steelworkers supporting these tariffs?
Yeah, there is some puzzle to that. Some tariffs will benefit. So don't get me wrong, I'm talking about net effects. There are going to be some people who are big winners in this, and there are going to be a lot of us who are big losers. So on net, it's a negative. If you're manufacturing automobiles, American automobile and automobile parts, eliminating the competition from overseas is fantastic for you because the price of cars for consumers is going to go up probably close to 10, 12% within the next few weeks or months. And so if you're making domestic car parts for a car that's manufactured in the US, then this is great for you. You get higher demand for your product. You're getting a big bonus. You're going to get a lot of extra hours work. There may even be a few people enter the workforce for you. So that's good for you. That affects a couple 100,000 workers in America right now who are doing that. If you're one of the 160 million households that needs to drive a car and the 30 or 40 million that need to buy a car over the next 2 years, this is a big negative. So the benefit would be to the steel worker, not so much the line worker, but the union is going to get more dues, the business that's going to be more profitable. And again, not to there are going to be a lot of new workers in manufacturing. There are going to be more profitable companies, and maybe wages will go up for some of those workers. It's easier for them to push for a benefit. So there are going to be a few companies that do well. Most manufacturing firms that are producing things like RVs and anything that uses steel imports, these are the demand for this is going to drop. And unless you can entirely cut off foreign supply, you're facing a major downturn.
I'm going to read this email I got from a listener today, and just tell me if this is something that you think we'll see nationwide, not only here in Indiana. And he says he got this letter from one of his suppliers, and it says, "We appreciate your continued partnership and trust you place in the blank industrial group to provide quality products and services. As you may be aware, the U.S. government has recently announced new tariffs on certain imported goods under policies enacted by the administration. Unfortunately, these tariffs will result in increased costs for the affected goods, and we must pass those costs on to you." Sound about right?
Yeah, it does. So you think about it, a Toyota Corolla assembled here in the United States has about 30,000 parts. Somewhere between a quarter and 40% of those are imported. So it's probably a third of the total cost is imported. There's now a 20, 25% tariff on those parts, depending which country they come from. That's going to add 8 to 12% roughly to the total cost of that car. And so you think, okay, well, gosh, that means my $35,000 Toyota Corolla is now $38.50. That's not very welcome. There's a catch to it, though. Now, to replace that car is more expensive. So your auto insurance is going to go up by 10% as well. The cost of an Uber ride in that vehicle is going to go up because the Uber driver now has to buy replacement parts. They have to realize the higher insurance costs. So the Uber driver prices are going to go up. Your DoorDash is going to go up. The cost of delivering goods to Walmart is going to go up because automobile replacement vehicles in their fleet are now 8, 10, 12% more expensive. So immediately within the next few months, a broad tariff like this is going to impact almost all goods and most services in the United States.
How does this affect U.S. products? Because, as you mentioned, they'll probably be tariffs placed on U.S. goods in retaliation. So, what's that do for American goods, say like American cars or agricultural products?
So great question. So there's two parts to that. The first one is if I'm an American producer, let's say anything that uses steel or aluminum that consumers have to buy, like a casket or a washer dryer, things like that. I'm going to build most of those cost increases back into that product. So there'll be less people buying it. It depends on what your demand is. So for caskets, people are going to still just pay that higher price. If it's a washer dryer, maybe use your old clunker for another year and get it fixed. And if you're in a really concentrated industry like automobile manufacturing or RVs or something like that, all the prices are going to go up because now you don't have that international competition. So American consumers will see prices go up on domestically manufactured goods, even with the tariffs being placed on foreign goods if they don't use it. So if I'm making an American car from all American products, I now have room to boost the price of my car. So I think you should expect all manufactured goods to have some sort of unexpected price shock in the coming 6 to 9 months. And then there's the retaliation. So we haven't talked about retaliation. So, chapter 2 of International Economics textbook, chapter 3, right after tariffs is you retaliate. And the retaliatory tariffs are tricky for a foreign government. They want to do two things. They want to minimize the pain to their domestic consumers. So Canadians don't want to pummel Canadians. Mexicans don't want to pummel Mexicans. French don't want to pummel the French. And they want to pummel Americans who are providing political support to the administration with these tariffs. Well, who are those people? Well, if I was advising them, it's no surprise, right? All their economists went to American universities and read our textbooks, read our papers. So they're going to say, well, first, we're going to take products that are located, either high vis products that are aligned with the administration. So Tesla is going to face 100% tariff or boycotts. That's fine. Who cares? The next challenge, it does matter if you're an American working in a Tesla factory who's producing stuff for the export market, but I'm not going to lose any sleep over. The next problem is they're going to pick products that are really identified with the red states. So where there's a good substitute for their consumers. So bourbon's going to go off the shelves in Canada and Mexico.
We've
It's going
already
to go
seen
off
that
the shelves
to a
everywhere.
certain extent, haven't we?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Well, and those are boycotts. Some of those are boycotts,
Mhm.
right? Which are going to be very hard to unravel. I like to remind Americans that in 1774, what's now the United States was the world's biggest consumer of tea. And then the tariffs on tea really pissed us off. We dressed as Indians, burned a ship, threw the stuff into the Boston Harbor, and we've never really recovered our tea consumption. So it's possible that the countries that we have targeted, particularly those that we've offended by calling them the 51st state like Canada, which is our
Mhm.
second biggest importer of wine and bourbon, they're just going to get out of the business of consuming American stuff.
What about agriculture products?
Yeah,
Because
that
I know the last trade war that happened, farmers suffered. Now, I think they got some kind of subsidy back from the government to offset that. But if you're a farmer here in Indiana or Iowa or Illinois, you combine that with what the government stopped buying for like US aid. How is that going to affect the agricultural economy here in the US?
Right, great question. So it's really important to sort of go back in history and see the in the fall of 2016, the agriculture community in America really got behind Donald Trump, and in part for that is that the Obama administration and the Congress had the temerity to cut agricultural subsidies up to the point where American farmers were almost paying a tax. They didn't quite get there, but they were almost paying a tax, and so they had paid very little negative taxes for most of the previous 20 years, and some of the budget cutting deals of 2014, 2015, 2016 cut that way down. And so immediately after Donald Trump was elected, Congress passed some benefits to farmers. And then we saw the tariffs hit in 2018. The retaliation, which was primarily from China, who are big importers of American soybeans, corn, and particularly pork, clobbered those industries. We spent $28 billion in 2018 trying to help remedy those industries. The soybean market went to Brazil. It's a big competitor now. We just barely recovered in some of those areas. And so the ag community is at both real big economic and political exposure on this, because the tariffs are going to target red states, which are ag states, and they're going to target those things that we're exporting here in Indiana: pork, soybeans, and corn. They're going to clobber those with retaliatory tariffs because you can get those replacement in from Canada or Mexico or China from somewhere else. And there's very little likelihood that Congress is going to be able to usher in the big bailout, because there's no incentive for Democrats to do so. So this is the time where I think Democrats are far more likely to say, look, we don't like to see this trade war, but we think if the pain's being exported to suburban families who are finding it more expensive to drive cars and to get their kids to school and to buy food, that ought to be felt everywhere. And so I think we're much like 2019. It took about 6 months. We were in a very sharp recession happening here in Indiana. I think we're about to go through something like that again without the big bailouts.
So I guess that was my last question for you. Will we see a recession, either nationwide or here in Indiana?
There are a couple of reasons to suggest that we should not have. The economy was robust coming into this. It was pretty strong. We should see continued job growth. We Inflation was nearly whipped at the beginning. As the economic uncertainty has caused help wanted ads to drop by close to 40% since inaugural day here in Indiana. That's just the Trump effect. That's economic uncertainty surrounding this trade war because it's so damaging. There are other parts of it that sort of lend economic uncertainty, but we haven't really felt yet, which are the big, DOGE cuts that probably won't materialize, but we may go through some disruption of that. And so I think it's very likely that March will have been a month of GDP decline. So first quarter right now looks like a GDP is going to slip into negative territory, which would mean that we're now in recession. Job losses probably haven't really started in earnest yet. We should expect 100,000, 150,000 jobs this Friday in the jobs report. If it's under 100,000, I'm worried. If it's negative, we clearly are moving into a recession. I think that if Liberation Day lasts 2 days because the stock market spooked the president, we could dodge a recession. If we have these tariffs in place for 3 months, I think that we'll go back. The economists who give the dates on recession will say it started March 1st.
Anything else that you wanted to cover before we let you run here?
I just think it's really helpful to just go back to the fundamentals about the way trade works and what it means. A lot of people think that they view the economy as a business. So if you're a business and you're buying more than you're selling, you're in trouble. You're going to go out of business. There are no academic studies. There's no serious thinker who's modeled a country like a big business. That's just not the way we think about it. A different way to think about it that Adam Smith offered, like a conservative, archetypical economist. Every economist thinks of the world this way. They model it. It's more like a village of small village with families where people are trading services inside their household. I'm going to do the thing that I'm best at. My wife's going to do what she's best at. My young son will do what he's best at. We're trading those services, and then we're doing it inside our community. And we trade those services. We get really good at one thing by specializing on it. The trade really is what gave us the modern world that gives us time for people to investigate. Scientists scientific, advances like vaccines and the cell phone. It gives us wealth, and moving away from that, if you really think it works, then you shouldn't trade with anybody. You shouldn't trade with the grocery store, shouldn't trade with the gas station, don't trade with your local restaurant, because you're running trade deficit with all those folks right now. Just make all your food at home, get your own gas at home, make your own car at home. If that's the world you want, that's what it's not as extreme as what President Trump is doing to us, but it's on the same pathway. And I think that is such a stark departure from American policy for really since we killed ourselves in the Great Depression, that it's hard to imagine we've gone back to it. We just have to relearn the lesson with a little pain, and I think that's what we're about to experience.
All right. If you're just joining us, we're speaking with Michael Hicks, economist at Ball State University. Again, before we sign off here, we need to thank our sponsors. First of all, Robin Winston does a great job of sponsoring not only the newsletter, but this podcast, and also former Congresswoman Jill Long Thompson. Her book, Across the Aisle, Why Bipartisanship Works for America. And you can also catch Michael's article. It's syndicated across the state, including the SnydeReport newsletter every Monday. Michael, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Good to be with you.
I'm Gary Snyder. He's not. He's Michael Hicks. This is the SnydeReport, and we're out.